This is the Let's Talk About the Deep Stuff podcast. I'm your host, Sean Kneese. On this show, we have off-the-cuff and candid conversations, or monologues, as I'm doing right now. Well, a monologue's still a conversation. It's a conversation with myself, and it's a conversation with you, the listener, because I'd love to hear your thoughts and everything on the topics we explore. Today, we're diving into a topic that hits close to home for many of us: confidence and assertiveness. Examining how to navigate assertive communication without veering into aggression or passivity, which is something I've been working on over the years too. And a lot of this, when I'm talking about these topics, I'm not only trying to help you, I'm trying to help myself too. So this is all stuff I'm working on too. If this isn't me saying I'm some kind of guru or I'm perfect or whatever, to me, I think that you never stop learning, you never stop growing. So I'll be sharing anecdotes and insights alongside valuable teachings from When I Say No, I Feel Guilty by Manuel J. Smith, which is, I think, probably the most known book that's on assertiveness and assertive communication. He gives a lot of techniques in that book on how to be assertive without being aggressive or confrontational. There's the balance between not saying what you think and not addressing your needs and not setting your boundaries and just being
aggressive, I'm gonna fight you,
there's a balance in between that, and that's assertiveness. And I think that confidence and assertiveness and also communication skills are all kind of intertwined. I think I'm pretty confident these days. I think sometimes I'm not always good at communicating my needs or what I'm feeling, and that's something I'm working on. And I think that's a part of assertiveness too. Sometimes it's not necessarily confidence. Sometimes it's just I don't know, how to say what I want to say into words and how to say it firmly. It sounds and then I've trying to work on this too. Sometimes when I say a need or I say something, that I feel that I want to be saying firmly, I say it almost like a question, and it sounds like I'm not sure, and that's something that I need to work on, and I know probably some of you out there need to work on too. Is just that just being saying what your needs are, your boundaries are as a statement, no, this is how I feel. This is what I believe. Not, I think maybe this is how I feel, and I'm talking like this, and it's a question. That's a bad habit to get into, but it's, old habits die hard, as they say. But so confidence is the belief in oneself and one's own abilities. Assertiveness is the ability to express one's needs and opinions confidently. So they go hand in hand. But confidence is not arrogance. It doesn't mean, oh, I think I'm the best. Because I've talked about vulnerability in this show before too. So I think it's also recognizing your weaknesses and your flaws and your imperfections, but just owning it. Yeah, that's me. If you're getting defensive and you're getting hey, no, I don't do that. You do this. I don't do that. You do this. That's not confidence either, because or it's narcissism and arrogance. But I think there's almost a insecurity with that too, because actually not always, because some people just think they're God and they're on. Some people are like Homelander on The Boys. They're just, there's no wrong they could do. I think that's also why a little bit of humility and a little bit of shame is good, because we don't want to be like Homelanders that are just psychopaths, right? Because at the other extreme is just being a psychopath or a narcissist or a sociopath, where a little bit of shame and a little self-doubt is good, because it exists there for a reason, because we live in this world with other people, and I think it's good to believe in yourself, be confident, not doubt yourself, and to be sure of what you're saying. But I think don't be too sure, because if you're too sure and you're just I know everything. And I don't think that necessarily means you're confident, that you think that you think you're right in every situation, that you never make a mistake, that you never could be wrong about something, or you could be doing something wrong, or you could be inconsiderate. That's not confidence. That's just blind arrogance. And I think the reason why we have self-doubt, and the reason why sometimes people aren't confident, is because at the end of the day, we live on this planet with other people. We all need to work together somehow. As different as we might be, as different as we might see things. So that's why a little bit of self-doubt is good, because you got to think about how you're affecting others too. And that's what I'm saying. Like it's a balance. That's a balance with that too. Like being confident and not being insecure, but also not being arrogant and just narcissistic and inconsiderate of other people's feelings or perspectives too. I think an important thing is getting over the need to impress. I know this is very much like an East Coast thing. I know it's in the New York area. There's like a competitiveness, like you gotta like impress people or be like the best. Like, oh, I'm doing this and this and that, and I'm doing this and this and that. At the end of the day, like, are people in your life that you respect or you like? Do you really like them around, or do you really value them because they're doing something that impressed you? Because or is it because, hey, this person's a solid person that I can trust? They're putting good out into the world. They're real. They're authentic. I can relate to them. Like, you got to think like the long term. What are the qualities that matter? And I think sometimes we get caught up in this, just like, oh, I gotta impress this person. I gotta be cool. I gotta be this. Like, and I know that's mainly like a high school thing, but I think a lot of people never grow out of that. I think that's in the real world too. That people, especially like in this Western society, like in this, and I know it varies in different regions of the country too. But in the East Coast, there's definitely like that competitive energy that like, oh, I gotta impress this person. I gotta show that I know this, and like I'm doing this and this and that, and I'm doing this and this and that, and I'm doing this. And that's kind of coming from a place of lack too, right? Because you feel like you gotta be all these things. You gotta be doing all these things, and you're not. You have no value, just you. So I don't think that. I think getting over the need to impress is a big part of confidence. And just being like, am I happy with myself? Like, am I a person who's respectful of others? Am I a person who's doing something of value to the rest of the world? Like, am I living up to my full potential, but not like as far as like, oh, I gotta impress people because, I got this fancy car, I got this great job, I got this. Because people in the long run aren't gonna remember value for that. They're going to value you because of how you treated them, like what you brought to their life. So, I mean, I know that was talking about happiness, but that kind of relates to what I was saying, that this need to like prove yourself and like show people you're this or show people you're that. Just work on what you are. Because if you work on what you are, if you work on actually being something amazing, you don't need to show people that you are. You don't need to, like... And that's just going to irritate people. You're just always trying to impress them or trying to be this or that. And, like, actually be something that is impressive. Like, be... And I don't mean, like, in a superficial way. I mean, like, real character. And before I move on to the techniques and when I say no, I feel guilty, and the real bulk of what I wanted to talk about in this podcast episode... I also wanted to mention another thing that can happen and that I've fallen into sometimes is defensiveness, when that comes from a place of insecurity, that comes from like when something challenges your self-image and the way you see yourself or the way you like to see yourself, then there's this kind of defensiveness, like, no, I'm not doing, or you feel attacked and you feel, and that's not good either. That that defensiveness is, it's not good to keep the stuff in and be too passive. It's not good to be defensive and just like when I say no, I feel guilty talks about how being able to listen to criticism is actually a valid trait in being assertive, because that shows that you're grounded, that okay, I'm not easily shaken because somebody says a criticism, and I'm open to listening. And being open to listening, being open to dialogue, that leads to a more productive conversation where you can both say your needs and meet each other halfway. But also when you keep things in, a lot of times I've noticed when I've kept things in and I thought I was passive in order to avoid conflict, and I was afraid of there being conflict if I said what I felt, and I tried to avoid it, and I would just go sulk if I was mad at someone. Like, I think there was a time, like, I thought of when I used to live with roommates, I had a roommate that hinted that they thought I was inconsiderate and stuff at one point, and then I would kind of keep it in that, oh, this person's saying I'm inconsiderate, they're this and that, and it kind of, well, first of all, I would get defensive about it sometimes because I would think that, no, I am considerate. I am a kind person. Like, that challenged the view I like to have of myself, that I'm considerate, I'm this, I'm that. Because in my mind, I was like, I'm trying to, be considerate, and I do my part around here. I do contribute. I do this, and because I had to defend that image so much, that's when I got defensive. And it's better to not have anything to defend and be like, oh, maybe I am inconsiderate, maybe I am this. These are just different thoughts in people's heads based on their experience with you. You could have a totally different perception of what your behavior is and how you come across, and how you come across to someone else, even if you feel you aren't that way, is still valid to them. So if you just go, no, I'm not that way, but it's like, well, in their experience, if they're telling you that, that's their experience with you. And then you can listen to that, and then you can tell them, well, okay, well, actually, you listen to it, you validate it, and then you can say, well, you also do this and this and that. But I feel like now I'm covering something I said in another episode, which was about deep listening. But I notice sometimes when I keep things in, like when this person thought I was being inconsiderate, I would kind of just listen, and then I'd sulk. Like, I left something out, and I'd be like, well, you know what, and I would think this to myself, like, but there's been times you've left things out, and there's been times I helped with this or that, and you didn't say anything. You're always calling out my mistakes. You're always calling out when I mess up. You're always calling out when I'm inconsiderate. What about when you're inconsiderate? But I would think all this stuff over and over again, rather than saying it at the time. Like, I would just be like, okay, I'd listen, and then I'd keep it in, and it would just, like, build up, and, like, it would just be there. Like, it would grow and grow and grow, and the more you try to ignore it, and the more you try to just push it in, and you don't say it, and you're not just, like, you want to avoid confrontation, it builds up, it builds up, it builds up, it builds up, and eventually you explode. And then you express yourself, and you say things that you regret, you get angry. So saying things early on, that diffuses the situation. Then you get it out of your system. Then things don't build up. Then it doesn't eat you up inside. Because I think that just eats you up inside if you avoid confrontation, and you just don't say what you feel. You don't say if something's bothering you. You just let it keep happening. And you're like, oh, I want to avoid conflict, or you avoid that person. That doesn't bring any growth. It doesn't bring any growth to not know how to communicate and set boundaries, or speak up for yourself if you think you're being treated unfairly. And this is all stuff I'm working on, like I've said in all the solo episodes where I go into this kind of stuff. So this isn't me being a guru, like I'm the expert on it. This is all stuff I'm working on too. So Breaking Bad, I'm going to give as an example, because we look at, Walter White was also a sociopath, in my opinion, so that's kind of why he went down the route he went, aside from, he needed the money to pay his medical bills and everything. But Walter White, at the beginning of Breaking Bad, didn't assert himself. He didn't stand up for himself. Like, the one boss at the car wash, kept telling him to work overtime and stuff and all this stuff, and he clearly didn't want to do it. He clearly didn't like it, but he kept doing it. He kept doing it. And then eventually he explodes, and he goes, fuck you, Bon Don. And he blows up at him. And he could have expressed that all along. And then, because of that hate that was like, well, he also had a big ego, the character Walter White. But because of that anger that was just like built up all that time, eventually later on, when he buys the car wash, he gets really cruel. He just gets back at him in a really cruel way. and he destroys his business, and he takes over his business. He makes him lose everything, and like that's a pretty extreme revenge that he probably wouldn't even have gotten that angry if he would have just said early on, hey, I cut me some slack. I don't want to work all these hours. I don't want to do overtime. I think I've done enough. I need a little less time. And if he had just said that then and there, then, well, I guess then there's always the worry, like, that you could get fired or something. Like, some bosses exploit their workers, too. But, I mean, if he had said something, though, it wouldn't have built up in the way it did. I mean, he's a fictional character, but this also relates to things that happen in the real world. I mean, not most of us aren't going to then buy the person's car wash and run them out of business and get a whole bunch of people to blackmail them and all that stuff that he did. But I'm just giving this as an example. Anyway, moving on to when I say no, I feel guilty. A major theme in this book is that the way sometimes when we feel like we're obligated to make somebody else happy with our actions or do what makes them happy, and while even if it compromises our own needs, and instead of putting our own needs first. And this is something that can happen when you're passive, and like I said, he also relates it to having poor communication skills. Like, so he talks a bit about improving your social skills within it too, like how that could help with assertiveness too, like being able to express yourself better, which is really one of the main things I've been working on and talking about and doing with the show, is learning how to express myself better and say my feelings. So I'm not going to go through like everything in the book, but the main assertiveness techniques he teaches, one of them is the broken record technique. And the broken record technique involves calmly and persistently repeating your request or statement without becoming defensive or aggressive. It helps to reinforce your position and asserts your needs effectively. So I'm trying to think of a good example for this. Like if you feel like you were duped in a transaction, maybe somebody ripped you off with something they sold you, and they're clearly bullshitting. Let's say that they're selling candy bars on the street, and then they said this is $2, and then somehow they trick you, and they're like, no, it's actually 10 for all of them in one, or something like that. And then the technique would be like, I want to get my money back. This isn't what I meant to pay for. And then they say, well, no, once you get it, there's no returns. If you keep saying, I want my money back, I understand there's no returns, but I still want my money back, I still don't want this, and you keep repeating that request again and again, and you don't. So that's the broken record. Or broken record could be like if someone's like, hey man, can I borrow your car? And then you're like, no, I don't want you to borrow my car. I don't feel comfortable with other people driving my car. It's not something I'm comfortable with. But hey man, how could you not let me borrow my car after everything I did for you? Like, I had you over here for Thanksgiving, and I cooked you a delicious turkey and everything, and then this is the thanks you get me. Like, you don't even let me borrow your car. And then you just say, I understand, but I still want to. You just persist in that. You don't waver on that. You don't have to have. It's also emphasized that like you don't have to have like even have a coherent reason why you're not comfortable with something. You just have to say, I understand, but like I'm not but I'm still not comfortable with it. Like I understand. There's like even another technique in there which I'll get to. I forget exactly what it's called, but it's like then you just say something like, yeah, I understand you did invite me over for Thanksgiving and we had delicious turkey, but I still don't feel comfortable people driving my car. Then they try to pressure you like, oh, I'm a good driver, I'm cautious. You don't even have to argue with them. You just say, yeah, I know you'll be cautious. I know you'll feel that way, but I still don't feel comfortable people driving my car. I think this was close to one of the examples in the book from what I remember. I've read this book more than once and listened to the audiobook a few times. But sometimes I like to do that, like repetitively read something just so it kind of sticks with me. Like if it's this kind of book, usually like that, it kind of then the techniques that are helpful can kind of stick with you. I think if you read it more than once, to just kind of get it inside your subconscious or unconscious or whatever the hell it's called. But it's that's something that's I'm trying to be more consistent with too, is just being like persistent in your position. Like, no, this is my position. I don't feel comfortable doing this. And then somebody, or like I've had it with my podcast, like people, there were times where people kind of pushed me into having them on my podcast. Not so much with the new show, but with the old show, it happened a lot. And I remember it was just such like an uncomfortable experience for me when people would do something like that, because I didn't want conflict. And I think a part of that is, it's weird because I do have a very outgoing side. I do have like, I like to put myself out there with this podcast and everything, but I think it's just like, because I also have a bit of an introverted side where sometimes I just like to be by myself, not have any conflict. I'd rather things are just chill. I don't know if that has to necessarily do with being introverted or more. It's hard to say, but I don't. Sometimes I'd rather do with not out conflict if I can avoid it a lot. That's something I've fallen into, and it really would stress me out in these situations where somebody would have this strong personality, and then they'd be like, I want to be on your show. I want to do this. I want to be on your show. And even though I didn't want to have them on the show, and I didn't feel like they were someone I wanted to work with or someone I would enjoy talking to and someone that would actually kind of get on my nerves because they were being so pushy about it that they wanted to be on my show, then it just put me in an uncomfortable situation, because then I was like, I have to keep making these excuses, and it sucks because there's pushy people like that just, even if you make an excuse, they keep going, so it's hard to just, it's something I've tried to work on for a long time. It's just being able to say no, being able to say I'm not comfortable with this, because I always feel like then I have to explain why, but sometimes, I don't even think giving an excuse is worth it, because an excuse, they could always find another way. Oh, but we could do this day instead, like, so just being able to say no and not think of an excuse. You don't even need to give them an explanation. This is what it's saying. Just be consistent in your explanation. That's something this book emphasizes too. Is just like, you don't need to have all the answers for your position. You don't have to have all these reasons to justify your position. It's just your position. It's just, and then somebody said, like, if somebody says, oh, I'm going to drop out of college and start my own business, and then their parents are kind of like, well, what are you going to do for money? What are you going to do for this? What are you going to... And then all these questions and stuff like that. I mean, he'd be spending more money going to college anyway, but that's beside the point. But then all these questions like this, and then the way using this technique, you would just be like, I'm dropping out of college, I'm starting my own business. I'm dropping out of college, I'm starting my own business. And you stick with that. And then if they say, what am I going to do? What are you going to do about money and everything? You don't even have to have an answer to that. I don't know. You can even just say, I don't know. Like, you don't have to have the answer to that to have that position. It's just be persistent in your position. It's just, this stuff takes practice, and it's still stuff I'm working on too. But fogging is another technique he talks about, where you acknowledge criticisms or negative feedback without becoming defensive or argumentative. Instead of denying or counteracting, you acknowledge the validity of the feedback without necessarily agreeing with it fully. Yeah, that's something that's been hard a lot. It's and actually I think it's kind of helped me back with some of my creative pursuits, but I'm getting over it now. So I think this is something I'm getting past, and it's going to help me with achieving my dreams and what I want to do more. Is just this fear of criticism and fear of somebody saying something hurtful to me, or because I think a lot of it was that I didn't always have a strong enough sense of myself. But it's like I know I need to be comfortable with criticism, to not only because people are going to say harsh things if you put yourself out there, you can't really do anything. Like, you can't really, because no matter what you do or what you say, even if you try to, let's say there's a controversial issue, like even if you try to be like in the middle ground, like, oh, I don't want to offend either side, I don't want to, then people are going to say, well, you're just a useless moderate, like you've said nothing of, actually you'll probably get more of a following if you take a strong stance. But sometimes it's not always easy to have a strong stance because things can be nuanced and everything too. But either way, like there's no getting out of it. Like somebody's either gonna like what you do or not like what you do. And the more authentic you are, the more you'll polarize some people, but also draw the right people too. But the fear of criticism is something I try to be more comfortable with, because I know as I put myself out there with this podcast, I'm gonna get some kind of message, like someone will say something to me that's hurtful, like, oh, you bald motherfucker, like, or whatever they want to say, or this guy sounds like a talking moose, or I don't know why I said talking moose. That was just the most random shit that came to my mind. But I'm thinking of another time, like other times I have listened to criticism and it felt better being comfortable with that criticism. It's uncomfortable to hear it first, but then it's like that's also how you grow, like sometimes I've gotten really like I'm getting better with it now, but like when people would send me criticisms of my podcasts, or like, oh, it's not good in this way, it's not good in that way, I get like real upset about it and stuff, and like I'd obsess about what they said, and then I'd be like, oh, this is all shit. But then I noticed every time they did that, it kind of helped me be better. Like, okay, if you can listen to criticism, it can help you be better too, so that's good. So that's basically fogging. So instead of denying or counterattacking, you acknowledge the validity of the feedback without necessarily agreeing with it fully. I'm reading from the book now. It says, fogging is teaching people to cope with manipulative criticisms from other people. And Manuel J. Smith said he instructs them not to deny any criticism. That's simply responding in kind, not to get defensive, and not to counterattack with criticism of their own. Going back to what I was saying earlier, that's kind of what I was saying before, that when that one roommate was trying to point out what I did, like something I left out or something I did, it was minor stuff, but I felt like they were always calling out, and this was more just my own insecurity and defensiveness, and me taking it personally, but I viewed it as that they were always calling out my shortcomings or my mistakes, and they never looked at theirs, and they never could be wrong, because sometimes they left shit out too or whatever, and sometimes they did things that were inconsiderate, and then when I did help or do something in some way to benefit everybody or help, that it was never acknowledged. So I would sometimes go into, you left that out that one day, instead of saying, you know what, you're right, I gotta not do that, I gotta work on that, that's right. Because that comes from insecurity too, just not being able to admit you're wrong, not being honest with yourself. Because confidence isn't being right all the time and being perfect, it's self-acceptance, it's not like narcissism. And I know I said that there's people like Homelander or whatever that are just pure narcissists that genuinely think they're perfect and everything and that they could do no wrong because they're pretty much psychopaths. But there's also, I think, narcissists that are insecure and they don't want to look at their imperfections. So instead of that, they just rather paint this image of themselves that they're this great being, a great enlightened being that can do no wrong. And then if anybody challenges that, it's a threat to their self-image. And that's an insecurity. That's not true confidence, because true confidence would be that you're able to look at your shortcomings and say, hey, I messed up, or hey, yes, I do need to do better than this, but still love and accept yourself. So that's the main difference between confidence and arrogance and narcissism. And that middle ground is the better extreme than the other extreme, which is, just self-flagellating and being like, oh, I can't do anything. Oh, I'm so unworthy of this. So I'll read some examples he gives of fogging in this book. He has a mother that said, you stayed out late nights, Sally. I tried to call you until 12:30 last night. And then this is how she does fogging. She goes, "That's true, Mom. I was out late last night." See, that's not arguing. I just remembered a number of time I used this when I was... This was years ago when I was a sales and marketing... With this job I had in sales and marketing, when sometimes, like, I was doing cold calling. And I remember a couple times, I think I left the computer on when he kept telling me to turn it off. And then when he told me, you gotta remember to turn the computer off when you go, the way I responded to that was, yeah, you're right, I really gotta be more careful about that. And he kind of, I remember he kind of respected it that I said that. He kind of was like, oh, he's willing to, like, he's honest about himself. He's, I could tell he respected that when I said that you're right, that I do need to be more mindful of that. But that's just a minor example. But anyway, it says that you stayed out late, Sally. I tried to call you till 12:30 last night. She says, "That's true, Mom. I was out late last night." So we can agree with any possible truth in statements people use to criticize us. Agreeing with the odds, he puts in parentheses. In the case of Sally and her mom, if Mom criticized her with a statement of direct wrongdoing, Sally might respond with assertive fogging. So here's the example of assertive fogging. "Sally, if you stay out late so much, you're going to get sick." And then this is her the fogging technique, which is just validating, agreeing with the criticism, not denying or fighting. Like, if it's a valid criticism, you just agree with it. And another thing I want to say is that confidence, like, when you're confident, you really know yourself. It's also knowing yourself, too. I know I said self-acceptance. It's also self-awareness. Like, if you know what's true and what's not true about you, then if somebody says a criticism and you know it's true, then there's nothing to argue with or nothing to defend, because, yeah, you're right. That's true. And if it's something you know is not true, then that's just like, what difference does it make? They're saying something that's not true. So either way, there's no reason to get defensive or be afraid of criticism if once you can master just self-knowledge and self-acceptance. All right, let's explore the book, and let's go to a conversation in it about a mother nagging her child about staying out late. The daughter says, "You could be right, Mom," or "That's probably true," or "I agree with you, Mom. If I didn't go out so often, I probably would get a lot more sleep." And then it goes on. She says, "Sally, you know how important looking good is to a young girl who wants to meet a nice man and get married. If you keep staying out late so often and don't get enough sleep, you won't look good. You don't want that to happen, do you?" And then Sally goes, "You're right, Mom. What you say makes sense. So when I feel the need, I'll get in early enough." So then that's like, she's acknowledging what she says. That's still being assertive and that's not shying away, but that's being honest too. So the fogging and all right, this whole conversation uses only fogging. And then this isn't what it says in the conversation, but let's say she wanted to keep staying out late regardless. She could say, "Yes, that's true. Maybe I am staying out too late, but I want to keep doing this." And then if she said, then that would be the broken record, that, no, I'm going to persist in my initial request or my initial statement. Even so, she could be like, yes, I know that I stayed out too late, but I want to keep staying out late. And then she would say, "Oh, you're not going to meet a nice man if you keep staying out late." And she'd say, you might be right. Maybe I won't, but I still want to keep doing it. And then she'll say, "Well, how are you going to meet a nice man?" And then I know the book mentions this a lot, that you can just say, "I don't know." You don't have to know. You don't have to have all the answers to have your position. If this is what you want, then just stick with it. You don't have to defend it. You don't have to explain yourself. I get into over-explaining myself, too. So here's negative assertion, which is, he says, "At the same time as working on the problem of teaching patients how to cope with manipulative criticism of their behavior through fogging, it became apparent to me that these people also made errors because of the reduced ability to cope with things in general." So another thing he brings up is negative assertion, which Now that I look at negative assertion here, it's pretty much similar to the fogging. It's just, I guess, a more specific kind of fogging in a way. It's like here they give an example: Sue, you shouldn't have cut your hair. It doesn't suit you now. And then the negative assertion is, yeah, that was a dumb thing for me to do, Mom. I don't like it this way myself. So I guess in a way, when I said the thing to my at my old job, when I said, yeah, I do got to remember not to leave the computer on, that was in a way negative assertion too, not just fogging. But it seems like they kind of go hand in hand, those two things. But negative assertion is more of a specific kind of fogging. It's more where you assert yourself negatively, like you recognize your flaw. That's what I meant before, like being honest with yourself. Like if somebody says something negative and you know it's true, being self-aware, then there's nothing really to defend, because okay, yeah, you're right about that, but you could still be firm about your point, because you don't have to have all the answers to feel a certain way or want to set a certain boundary or not be comfortable with something. You don't even have to have a real reason to not be comfortable with something. And I also found that a lot of times when you give an excuse and somebody's trying to push you into doing something you're not comfortable with, the excuse usually is like they'll find a way to, well, you could just do this instead, or you could, they'll find a way to make the excuse not an obstacle. So it's more easy to just say, I don't feel like doing that because it would make me uncomfortable, because I think it's very hard to argue with that, right? Because you can't really argue with someone's feelings. Like, I don't want to do that. I'm not comfortable with that. I don't feel comfortable doing that. As opposed to, oh, I can't do that because, I gotta go take the recyclings to the. I think of weird examples. I just think of really random examples, but I gotta go take the recyclings to the recycling center, so I can't do that at that time. I gotta go walk my dachshund. I gotta go to my flute lesson. I gotta go play pinball in the pinball tournament. I gotta go run a mile. I gotta go to the zoo. All these excuses. Oh, you could go to the zoo another day, but if you just say, I don't feel comfortable doing that, I don't want to do that because that's not something I'm comfortable with, and if you're my friend, you could even go as far as say, like, and if you're my friend, you should respect that. That's my boundary. That's what I want. And sometimes, even if friends mean well, even if people in your life mean well, you gotta set boundaries in relationships. You gotta say what you're okay with and not okay with, and not be pushed into something you're uncomfortable with or something you don't want just because people are certain kind of pressuring you. Because, only you know what's right for you. Only you know what you want or what you're comfortable with. I mean, it's hard to say because you want to... There's this idea that, you got to be nice. You got to please them somehow. You want to say no, but you want to please them. And sometimes you just got to say fuck pleasing them. Because at the end of the day, if they're not respecting your boundaries, if they're not taking no for an answer, if they're not saying they're not okay with you saying, oh, I don't want to do that right now, then they obviously don't give a shit about pleasing you, about making you happy. So it should go both ways. Then, no, I don't want to do this. And you don't owe them an explanation. But anyway, getting back to the negative assertion, that's like if somebody calls you a dumbass and you think about it and you're like, yeah, you know what, I was a dumbass in that situation, rather than being defensive and being like, I am not a dumbass, I am the smartest man in the world, I was not dumb in that situation, you were dumb. You could just be like, yeah, you know what, I was a dumbass. I was a dumbass in that situation. And I really got to work on that. So that's kind of the negative assertion. Yes, here it goes. I'll read. If you are non-assertive in coping with your mistakes, you could be manipulated by other non-assertive people through your feelings of guilt and anxiety into seeking forgiveness for making the error and somehow making up for it, or denying the error through defensiveness and counter-criticism, which provides your hostile critic with a verbal punching bag to aggressively work out his own feelings of frustration. In either case, you cope poorly and feel worse. And again, as with most the beliefs we learned in childhood. This is still from the book, As I Know, Say No, I Feel Guilty. Few of us could change our belief that errors are wrong. And in parentheses, we are guilty simply by thinking about it. Most of us first change our verbal coping behavior when confronted with an error so that we can emotionally desensitize ourselves to possible criticism from other people or from ourselves. Once this emotional change is accomplished through behavioral change, the childish belief of guilt through error will automatically change. It is difficult to maintain a negative belief about yourself when it's no longer supported by feeling rotten about yourself as a result. So I think that's the main thing about the negative assertion. If they say, you shouldn't have cut your hair, it doesn't suit you now, like the example they give in the book, and she just responds, that was a dumb thing for me to do, Mom. I don't like it this way myself. She's recognizing the flaw. She's recognizing the error. I mean, it's subjective whether the hair looks good or not, but she's recognizing it, but she at the same time accepts it. She doesn't feel bad about it. Like, you can recognize your mistake or your imperfection without feeling bad about it. I think that's the main point he's making here about the negative assertion. And in other areas, negative assertion could be used to cope differently when receiving valid criticism of your performance and learning a concept, a new skill, or new language, a new trade, or a job, in a social situation. In any of these situations, when substandard performance is pointed out, you can cope assertively as follows. You didn't do well in science class. You're right. I wasn't too smart in the way I handled that project, was I? You see, that's self-awareness. That's saying, yeah, you know what, you're right. I wasn't too good at that. And if you're a narcissist, she just goes like, no, I'm good at everything. You know, I'm a jack of all trades, master of all. Like, I could do everything. I could do algebra and chemistry and poetry and all this stuff. Like, I'm a genius in everything. What are you talking about? If you're just saying that, and then you're not looking at what you really are. You're not looking at the flawed, perfectly imperfect human being that you are. So that's not true confidence. That's not true happiness. So let me look at else. They talk more about fogging. I don't want to. I mean, it's a. You could read the book. I highly recommend this. But there was also negative inquiry, like when somebody gives you a negative criticism, that you ask more and learn about it. And I've done that a few times. Like when I wanted to, and sometimes it's, you know, that brings strength when you're ready to, like, if somebody gives you negative feedback, rather than run away from it, like, you ask more, like, well, what do you mean? Like, and then you inquire about it, and then you can see if there's anything valid they're saying, and then through that you can improve. Because, like, how can you, like, if you had a bad habit of, like, making this, like, weird facial gesture that looks like you're some kind of possessed person that's possessed by, like, some kind of, if you make this facial expression constantly in public that makes you look like you're kind of possessed or whatever, and it freaks people out, and you never know it because you're always like, you look like Linda Blair in The Exorcist when you make this face, and then nobody notices. I mean, you know, and other people notice, but you don't. Nobody ever says anything. And then one day a friend points it out to you, and then you're like, oh, well, what do you mean by that? And then they tell you, well, you know, when you kind of go like this and bulge your eyes, and you do make that weird face that kind of looks like Linda Blair in The Exorcist. Oh, I know what I need to do now. So now I know I can stop looking like Linda Blair in The Exorcist when I'm at the bus stop, and I won't scare people off anymore, because now I know what I need to do. I need to just change my facial gestures and not look like Linda Blair from The Exorcist. Okay, so then I don't want to take too much more time with this episode, but another thing that he mentions is workable compromise, where you find a way to resolve the situation where both people's needs can be met in a way that doesn't violate your boundaries or doesn't in a way, and it's not a decision where you're both comfortable and you both walk away with, so because sometimes you have to compromise in some kind of situation, and he gives a lot of examples, like, and then self-disclosure is another thing he mentions, which is where you give the person more information about your situation, where they understand why you feel this way, that I'm not comfortable doing this because this happened to me and I did this and that and I've had this experience. You could say that, so that'd be self-disclosure, while you go into more reasons and more, give them more information on your situation and why you feel this way or why you're making this decision. But I've already taken a lot of time with this episode, and I don't want to drag on too long. I guess what I want to close with is, I think that when you keep stuff in and you think it's somehow avoiding conflict, or it's gonna ruin your relationship if you set a boundary or you say something, I think in the long run there's more harm when you keep stuff in, because when you keep stuff in, it builds up, and then more resentment comes, and then it's more likely to come out in passive aggressive ways or toxic ways if you have an issue with someone, rather than if you just say, hey, I don't like it when you do this, it irritates me, and then that person can, if they're a real friend or if there's someone who's worth having in your life, they're going to say, oh, I didn't know that made you feel that way, I'll stop doing that. As opposed to, if you keep it in and you don't say anything, then it's just going to build up resentment in you, and then it'll come out. The aggression, the annoyance you feel at them is still going to come out. It'll just come out in more toxic ways, in more passive aggressive ways. So I think in the long run, the way to, you can try to avoid conflict and everything, but the more you try to avoid it, I think the worse it gets. And so I think that if you want to maintain relationships, if you want to have a good relationship with your boss, or you want to live the life you want, I think you have to be able to express yourself and not keep things in, because I think that letting that build up in the long run is worse than any minor discomfort that'll happen through expressing yourself or saying what you feel early on and not letting things build up. So I hope you all got something out of this. I'm kind of helping myself with this episode as I'm helping all you. And if you want to keep updated with future episodes of Let's Talk About the Deep Stuff on Spotify, iTunes, and wherever you get your podcasts. And that's about it for this episode. I'll catch you on the next one.